everyone, welcome to this in-depth tutorial on color mixing where I expose the secrets to understanding color. I'm going to show you not just how to mix colors, but why it works the way it does, so that you have a deeper understanding of how color works, which you can use to take your art to the next level. Everything will be demonstrated in real time so that you can see the full process. I'll be using oil paint, but these concepts apply to any art medium. First, we'll talk about the paint we'll be using for this tutorial and why these specific colors have been chosen. We're then going to construct our color wheel and understand how we can mix any color. And finally, we'll put this knowledge into action with a wide range of examples. Before we start mixing our color wheel, I'm just going to clarify some important notions that I'll be using in this video. We'll be talking about hue, saturation, and value. When I talk about hue, I'm talking about what we generally think of as the color. Is it more red, yellow, green, etc.? Saturation refers to the intensity or the vibrancy of the pigment. If a color has a high saturation, it means it's very vibrant. If it's completely desaturated, then it becomes grey. The final notion, which is the most important, is value. Values refers to how light or dark a color is. In other words, if you convert it to grayscale, how close to black or white is the color? Getting your value right is the most important thing when painting. Even if your colors are completely wrong, but your value is correct, your painting will still look realistic. We'll be using 5 different tubes of paint for this tutorial. I'll be using the 3 primary colors, red, blue, yellow, as well as burnt umber and titanium white. More specifically, I'm using cadmium yellow, ultramarine blue, and Le Franc red. Cadmium red would be better, but I don't have any right now, and this paint is close enough. And it doesn't matter if you don't have the same brand of paint or the same colors as me, because after this tutorial, you'll be able to apply these concepts with any tubes of paint, as long as you have the 3 main primary colors and white. So we have our 3 primary colors, and with these, we can construct our color wheel. To do this, we're going to start by making the most vibrant or the most saturated colors we possibly can. We're going to start by simply mixing our secondary colors. These are the colors we get when mixing 2 primary colors together. I'm going to do this by mixing pretty equal amounts of my 2 primary colors. It doesn't have to be exact. So you'll notice this gives a very dark purple, which doesn't really look purple, but if we add some white to it, we can see its hue better. It's still a desaturated purple, but this is just a limitation of oil paint. If you want a true, vibrant purple, such as magenta, you need to buy one of those tubes of paint. But you wouldn't generally need it very often because bright purple isn't often found in nature. It's the same thing here with the green. I'm just going to show you what we get if we lighten this up a bit. And finally, we can mix a nice vibrant orange. The red is very strong, so I want to add some more yellow to it, because I'm aiming for an orange hue halfway between red and yellow. This looks about right. So now we have the main colors as we generally tend to think of them. But obviously there are many hues in between these 6. So we're filling out the rest of our vibrant colors, or the most saturated colors. So we're going to make a gradient that fades from one hue to the next. And I'm doing this by pushing paint out from the center of each pile towards the neighboring color and gently mixing them together. There is less and less paint the further I go from the color. My tube of yellow paint is actually called Cadmium Free Yellow. In some brands it's called Cadmium Imitation or Cadmium Hue, and it's designed to behave like cadmium paint, but it doesn't actually contain cadmium. In case you don't know, this is because cadmium is toxic. Cadmium paint is supposedly safe to use, but I tend to get paint on my hands, and I have dogs who are capable of eating anything they can find, so I personally prefer to avoid it. This is a very common palette choice. If you've watched artists on the internet, many use this palette or a variation of it. But what's so special about these specific colors? Well, not all pigments are equal. If you've played around with oil paints, it becomes obvious very quickly that some pigments are much stronger than others. Cadmium paints in particular are known for their vibrancy and their light fastness, which means that they don't fade over time. When you want to lighten up a color, you generally mix it with white, but the color can very quickly become chalky and washed out, making it hard to obtain vibrant colors with light values. But the cadmium paints maintain their vibrancy very well, even when mixed with white. We're using ultramarine blue for similar reasons. It's a beautiful deep blue with a very strong pigment, and it's also very stable and light fast. So why are we using burnt umber? Burnt umber is actually a very yellowy brown, so you can think of it like a dark yellow. And we're using this alongside ultramarine blue because it's a shortcut to mixing dark colors. We could use a lighter blue and not use burnt umber at all and still get the same results, but we'll get there faster with burnt umber. So why then are there so many colors to choose from? Well, the answer is mainly shortcuts. But different pigments of oil paint have different properties, and sometimes you'll be looking for something specific. For example, some paints have a high transparency, which is great if you want previous layers of paint to shine through. I've chosen this particular color palette because it'll allow us to mix nearly any color we can think of. I say nearly because there's some very vibrant colors we can't mix, and we just have to buy the tube of paint. For example, we can't mix magenta or cyan, which are shades of vibrant purple and vibrant blue. This is because they're actually also primary colors, but they don't teach you that in school. Primary colors just means colors that you can't get by mixing other colors. But this isn't really a problem because these colors are rarely found in nature. When you choose to limit the number of colors you use in your palette, you're ensuring that you have a greater color harmony in your painting than if you were to rely on buying a lot of paints that come from the tube. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually easier to control shifts in your colors when you use a limited color palette. But you'll see what I mean when we do the demonstration. So here we have our color wheel, which is more of a weird color triangle, but you get the idea. But this could actually be an easier way of understanding it. Now these are our most saturated colors, or our most vivid colors, but real life is rarely like this. When we're mixing our paints, we're going to want to make colors with many different levels of saturation. So we now have to know how to desaturate these colors and also why it works. So now that we have all our vivid colors, or our most saturated colors, let's look at the other extreme, colors with absolutely no saturation. In other words, black, white, and the shades of grey. We know that white is the absence of color. On the other end, we have black, which is the combination of all colors, or all three primary colors. So I'm going to take blue, red, burnt umber, which is a dark yellow, and mix them all together. I'm trying to make sure my proportions of all colors are equal. This will give us a nice deep black. It's why you'll often hear the advice to mix your own black, because you have a much greater control and it comes out a lot richer than the paint that you'd find in the tube. So just like we did before, we're going to create a gradient between white and black. I'm mixing intermediate values and then I'm pushing the paint outwards towards its neighbor. So I just want to quickly show you what would happen if we mix our colors with a primary blue. You can see that it doesn't actually change the colors that we can produce very much. Despite it being a light color, when mixed it gives us a dark purple and a dark green, just like the ultramarine blue. Blue naturally darkens any color it mixes with. This is because of the way our eyes perceive blue. I already have a video on this, which I will link in the description if you're interested. Here we can see that we can still make a nice deep black with only the lighter primary colors, because black is just a combination of the three primary colors. So now that we understand that mixing the primary colors gives us black, it implies that the result of mixing the three primary colors is completely desaturated. And to lighten it up into a shade of grey, we just add white. We can now talk about desaturating colors by using their complementary colors, and why this works. First, what is a complementary color? The complementary color is the color which is opposite on the color wheel. So for example, the complementary of red is green, the complementary of blue is orange, and the complementary of purple is yellow. Let's take a look at a few examples. Let's take orange first. So we're going to take its complementary color, which is blue. And I'm just going to take a tiny bit of blue so as to not overdo it. And you can see the orange is already desaturated, but I'm going to desaturate it a little bit more. I'm adding the blue little by little because the blue is so powerful and I don't want to overdo it. It's much easier to desaturate a color than to try and increase the saturation. You also don't need to get the perfect quantities on the first try. We can always adjust it. I don't know if there's any artist who can get it perfectly right on the first try. Maybe some if they have a few decades of experience. I don't know. Like earlier, I'm trying to make a gradient from a vibrant saturated orange to a desaturated orange. Let's lighten this up a bit so you can see better. I'm just adding a bit of white to it. Make sure to clean your palette knife so as to not mix the colors too much and muddy your colors. It's something I often forget to do and then I regret it. I'm just going to place this desaturated orange next to the vibrant orange so you can see the difference. So let's do red next. The complementary of red is green. So I'm going to pretend I haven't already mixed this green and I just have my tubes of paint. So I'm taking blue and yellow to make my green. And you'll notice that these are the same ingredients we used to make black. Now let's lighten this up a bit like we did for the orange so we can see this better. On the one end we have a very desaturated red, then we have an intermittent red, and right on the top where we haven't added any green we have a saturated red, or pink in this case because red plus white gives us pink. So now that we know that the complementary color desaturates a color, let's take a look at why it works like this. We already got a hint when we desaturated the red. A complementary color is just a combination of the primary colors that are missing. Meaning that if we added an equal amount of a color and its complementary color, we would make black. Let me show you what I mean. The complementary of red is green, which is blue plus yellow. Adding them all together in equal proportions, we know gives us black. Desaturate red, we still have a lot more red than any other color, so it is just pushed the red towards the black instead of turning it black. For orange, we added blue, because orange is in fact red plus yellow. But like the red, we had a much greater quantity of red and yellow than blue. So we just pushed it towards black. These are two simple examples which illustrate the point. If we were to mix a red-orange, then we need a blue-green to desaturate it, because a red-orange is red with a small quantity of yellow, and blue-green is blue with a small quantity of yellow. So this begs the question, why not just add black or grey to everything and be done with it? Let's say we want to desaturate red. When you're adding grey, you're also adding red, because a perfectly neutral grey is just equal quantities of red, blue and yellow. So first, this shifts the hue in ways that you may not want it, and it can lead to everything looking washed out. Adding the complementary colour gives you a lot more control over what you're doing. It allows for much more nuanced paintings with richer tones. There are also many shades of grey, a lot more than 50. There is so much that goes on in these desaturated colours within a painting that it can actually make or break a painting. It's when you start playing with these subtleties that your paintings go to a whole new level. But this subject deserves its own video. When you take grey from a tube and mix it into everything, it's very easy to lose all subtlety and control over your colours, and things start to seem flat, lifeless and washed out. There will be times when grey is what you need, or at least a grey that you've mixed yourself, but most of the time, adding the complementary colour is a much better option. So let's take a look at some examples. But if you found any value in this video so far, please consider leaving a like or subscribing. Here I have some swatches for paint colours that I found at my local hardware store, and we're going to try and match some of them. For this section, I'm going to pretend that I haven't mixed my colour wheel and I just have the paint out of my tube. So red, blue, yellow, white and burnt umber. Each time I compare my mixed colour with the colour I'm aiming for, I'm going to be asking myself two main questions. How does the value of my mixed colour compare to my target colour? In other words, is my mixed colour lighter or darker than my target colour? And which way do I need to shift the hue? I'm not going to worry about saturation for now, because when I change my value, I'm going to inevitably change the saturation as well. It's just the way oil paints work. But the most important thing to get right is the value. If your value is correct, your paintings will look good no matter what the hue. To change the value, we can use white and sometimes yellow to lighten the colour, and ultramarine blue and burnt umber to darken it. For now, I'm just almost randomly taking quantities of colour that I think will put me in the ballpark range of the colour I'm trying to match, and I'm not expecting to come anywhere close. Even if you're really far off, it doesn't matter. So I'm just taking some red, yellow, white and mixing it together, and then we'll see what we have and adjust. So when I hold it next to my target colour, it looks too dark and too red. So we want to lighten the value and shift it towards yellow. So we're going to add a bit of yellow, and this should lighten it up a bit and shift it towards yellow. Now I'm separating it into two sections for multiple reasons. And this is how I'd actually mix colours for an actual painting. I rather like the color that we've made, so I'm going to keep some of it aside. I'm then going to push the rest of the paint towards a lighter value and towards yellow. This will allow us to maintain a better color harmony and add in slight hue and value shifts in a painting. It really helps to add a bit of subtlety. Also, if I make the second group too light or too yellow, I can use this first bit of paint to darken it or bring it back towards red if I just need to make slight subtle adjustments. And if we have less paint, we don't have to add as much white to it to change the value. This stops us from having insanely big piles of paint that get exponentially bigger. So we're just shifting the value and hue. It's something that you feel out, and you don't need to feel any kind of pressure to get it perfectly right the first time. We're just adjusting it when we need to. So I think the value is about right, but it needs to be slightly yellower. We'll test it in a moment. So let's test this. Okay, so this would be much better with a brush. I'm just cleaning my brush off using a bit of this paint. So this is still too dark and too saturated. I'm going to add more white, which will lighten it up and desaturate it at the same time. But we'll check the saturation once the value is correct. Now I think this is very close, but it needs to be slightly more red and maybe a bit too desaturated. So I just want to make a very minor adjustment. So I'm going to take a bit of paint from our previous pile and mix it with part of our current pile, because I think that the correct color is somewhere here between the two. No, now we've gone too far the other way. So let's add more of our lighter color. We're getting closer, but it needs a very slight adjustment to the value and saturation. So I'm going to use a bit of a very light grey that we mixed earlier, because it needs such a small adjustment that if I were to go in straight with blue, it would destroy it. If I was mixing this for a painting, I mix a very light grey because the adjustment is almost imperceptible. Now I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's do another one. I'm just going to move this paint we have here off to the side. Let's do a desaturated color next. Let's do this desaturated purple. So first I'm going to need blue and red to make the purple color, and some yellow to desaturate it. So I'll take some raw umber, and then we're going to mix this around and see what comes out. So this is way too dark. We're going to add some white and see what hue we have too. Here I could have added yellow instead of raw umber, but it doesn't really matter. So this doesn't seem too far off. We have a sort of desaturated purple, but not the correct one. Let's check. I'm first just cleaning my brush off again. I've wiped it off with a paper towel that I always have beside me. And now I'm taking a bit of new paint and smearing it around somewhere else, so that any remaining paint is diluted with the new paint and lifted off my brush. Don't forget to wipe your brushes off, so as not to muddy your colors. I forget sometimes too, and then regret it. So we can see that it's too saturated and too dark. I'm taking a bit off like we did previously and starting a new pile. I've added what is probably too much raw umber. I probably should have added yellow because it's too dark, but it doesn't really matter. I can fix it. When mixing desaturated colors, I automatically go for the more desaturated option. And we've added raw umber because it's a dark yellow, and yellow is purple's complementary color. So I'm lightening it up with a bit of white. Let's check how we're doing. This is still far too dark. I'm going to focus on fixing the value first, and then we'll adjust the hue. Value is by far the most important aspect. When you learn how to control your values while making shifts in the hue and saturation, that's when your paintings really go to another level. So not matching the correct hue or saturation is not actually that important. Now I think I may have gone and made this too light. Yeah, that's way too light. When trying to lighten it up, I went too far in this direction. So I'm going to bring back some of my darker value, which I kept aside like we did before. And this allows us to make minor adjustments. I'm actually just going to mix it all together and see what I get, because I think that the reality is somewhere in between these two piles of paint. Now let's test this and see how close we are. It's better, but it's a bit too red. So let's add just a touch of blue. and a bit of yellow, this should desaturate it a bit too. This time it's too yellow. So let's bring back some purple by adding some blue and some red. Remember, when you're mixing paint, there's no rush. Just take the time you need to feel everything out. Now this is starting to look pretty good. I'm just using the paint we've previously mixed and kept aside to make almost imperceptible adjustments to get it just a bit closer. And I think that this is now good enough. Alright, let's do another one. So I've just moved the paint we've mixed off screen because I'm running out of space. Let's do this natural looking green over here. We'll start with some blue and some yellow. Remember to clean your palette knife so you don't muddy your colors. And we'll add some red to desaturate it a bit. Again, this is an almost random starting point. The green we're trying to match is lighter and more yellow than ours, so we're going to add in some yellow. It's looking far too dark still, so let's add some white. I'm just going to add a bit more green to add some saturation, so some blue and some yellow. Remember, at this stage everything is still experimental and approximative. We're trying to aim as best we can and then we're refining it. My priority is still matching the value, but I'm also taking note of the hue and saturation shifts I'll need to do. So this is looking too dark and too desaturated. I added too much red in the beginning, but it doesn't matter. Everything can be corrected. You don't need to feel pressure to get everything exactly right the first time around. So what I'm going to do is start a new pile and then use my previous pile to desaturate it, instead of just adding more green to my first pile. So I think that the target color actually lies somewhere in between these two. So I'm going to mix bits of them together and then adjust. A lot of color mixing is just problem solving. Again, if this was for an actual painting, I wouldn't be too concerned about getting the hue exactly right, and I'd be focusing on the value. I'd also keep a gradient of colors so that I can make small, subtle adjustments that would allow me to create a more dynamic painting. Okay, so we're getting closer, but it needs to be lighter. Notice how I'm keeping a wide range of values on my palette. It needs to be less yellow, so let's add some more of the blue-green back. We're not too far off now, just a couple more adjustments. It's now a bit too blue, so we're going to just add a touch more yellow back in here. We're nearly there. I'm now just tweaking it using what's already on my palette. Now this looks better, and I think I'm pretty happy with that. Alright, let's do one last example. Again, I've just moved the previous paint off to the side because I don't have much space. This time we'll try and do a light color, which is almost an off-white. So let's do this one here. So this is mainly going to be white. We'll add a bit of yellow, and because this is such a light value and we're using such a small quantity of yellow, we're not going to add red and blue directly to our main mixture because it will just overpower everything. We're going to make a light purple color off to the side. Now I can add some of this light purple back in to create a desaturated color. Remember, this is just a vague estimation for now, which we will later adjust as needed. Now, despite only using small quantities of paint other than white, it's looking too dark, so we'll add some white to a selection of paint. So let's check this and see how far off we are. Remember to keep your brush very clean, especially with light or dark colors. We don't want paint from the brush to pollute this. So we definitely need some more white. It's still far too dark. Also, make sure your palette knife is nice and clean. Let's check it again. So this is pretty close, but it's now too white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a gradient like we did with the color wheel between our darker color still on our palette and our color which is too light. And then take some paint from there. So let's just add a touch of yellow back in here. Just a bit lighter. I think this is actually the same as the swatch above it, so it just disappears in the top swatch. So we want to go from this to this. So let's lighten it up. Now, if this was for an actual painting, this will be largely sufficient, but I'm going to try and adjust it further. So this looks about right. So if you've gotten any value from this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up or subscribing, because I'm planning on making more tutorials about oil painting and art in general. If you'd like me to do a tutorial on any specific color palette, let me know in the comments.